Mercedes just dropped a lap so fast, it triggered questions before the session even ended. A 20-year-old rookie, 3 consecutive pole positions, and a gap that no one, not even Verstappen, could close when it mattered most. But here's the part no one can ignore. The same car that dominated qualifying failed to show up everywhere else. One Mercedes on pole. The other, out before the final fight even began. Same machine. Same track. Completely different reality. And when Formula One sees that kind of contradiction, it doesn't celebrate. It investigates. Because hidden inside that 1 minute and 27 seconds is something that might change the entire season. Something about power. Something about timing. And something the FIA is already starting to look at very closely. If that lap was legal, Mercedes just unlocked a weapon no one can stop. If it wasn't, this story is about to explode. At first, it looked like a comeback story. Mercedes had been hit hard in the sprint. The pace wasn't there, the confidence wasn't there, and for the first time this season, they didn't look like the team in control. And that's what makes what happened next feel so strange. Because just one day later, on the exact same track, under the same Miami heat, everything flipped. Antonelli didn't just take pole, he dominated it. A 1 minute 27.798, untouchable, clean, precise, and delivered at the exact moment when grip, temperature, and timing aligned perfectly. But here's where the story splits in two. Because while Antonelli was executing one of the cleanest laps of the season, George Russell was already out. Eliminated before the final phase. Gone. Same car concept. Same setup direction. Same opportunity. Completely different outcome. And that's not just unusual, that's destabilizing. Because in Formula One, teams are built on consistency. You don't just design a car to work for one driver, for one lap, under one exact condition. That would be like building a plane that only flies perfectly for 10 seconds. Impressive, but dangerous. Now Mercedes had an explanation ready. They pointed to tire behavior, something that sounds simple but is actually everything in qualifying. Think of tires like a window that opens and closes. Too cold, and there's no grip. Too hot, and performance drops instantly. And according to the data, Antonelli hits that perfect window faster than Russell. He's more aggressive, more decisive, and that gives him an edge when every second counts. But that explanation only solves part of the puzzle. Because the gap wasn't small. It wasn't the difference between first and third. It was the difference between pole position and not even being in the fight. And this is where engineers, rival teams, and now even the FIA start asking a different kind of question. Not how fast the car is, but how that performance is being unlocked. Because when performance depends too heavily on a very specific condition, a very precise moment, or a very narrow operating window, it suggests something deeper is controlling it. Something that might not be visible from the outside. And this is where the Miami weekend quietly shifts from a simple qualifying result into something much bigger. Because now, it's no longer just about Antonelli being fast. It's about why that speed only appears under such exact circumstances. And why, when everything lines up perfectly, Mercedes suddenly becomes untouchable. But then, something changed the entire direction of the story. Because this wasn't just about Mercedes anymore. It became about what everyone else was doing, and why it still wasn't enough. Red Bull arrived in Miami with updates. Not small ones, but targeted changes designed to fix their biggest weakness, straight-line speed. Ferrari showed up with one of the largest upgrade packages of the season. McLaren came in with confidence after dominating the sprint. On paper, this should have closed the gap. And in some ways, it did. Verstappen got closer than anyone had all season. Just over a tenth behind Antonelli. Close enough to see it. Not close enough to take it. That sounds small. But in Formula One, that gap is everything. Because when every team improves, and one team still stays ahead at the exact same moment, it forces a different kind of question. Not who improved, but who found something extra. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. That final session, the last 12 minutes, the moment where pole is decided, everyone went out at the same time. Same track conditions. Same tire compound. Same pressure. And yet, the result was locked in after the very first attempt. No one improved on the second run. Not because they didn't try. Because they couldn't. The track cooled slightly. Grip dropped. Lap time slowed. Which means Antonelli didn't just set the fastest lap. He set it at the only moment it was possible. Perfect timing. Perfect execution. But also, perfect conditions. And this is where rival teams start paying very close attention. Because if your entire advantage appears in a narrow window like that, it raises a deeper question. Are you just better at finding that moment? Or is your car designed to peak exactly there? Think of it like a runner who only sprints at full speed for a few seconds, but in that burst, no one can touch them. It's brilliant. But it also makes people wonder how that burst is being created. Now combine that with something else. Mercedes themselves admitted that their strength is in qualifying. 1 lap. Maximum power. No compromises. But over a race distance, that advantage fades. And that imbalance is the key. Because Formula One regulations are designed to prevent exactly that kind of extreme difference. Cars are supposed to perform within a consistent framework, not behave like two completely different machines depending on the situation. So when one car looks average over multiple laps, but unbeatable over one, it doesn't just raise eyebrows. It raises flags. And this is where the tension inside the paddock starts to grow. Because teams don't protest immediately. They observe. They compare data. They look for patterns. And if those patterns repeat, that's when things escalate. So now the focus shifts again. Away from position. And directly towards something much harder to see. How that performance is being generated in the first place. Because hidden inside that perfect lap, there might be a detail no one has fully understood yet. And if that detail crosses the line, even slightly, everything Mercedes just achieved in Miami could be questioned overnight. And this is where the pressure starts to spread beyond just lap times and into something much more uncomfortable. Because the first reactions inside the paddock were not celebration, they were questions. Quiet ones, at first. Engineers from rival teams began comparing sector data, looking at where Mercedes was gaining time, not just how much. And what they found wasn't a massive advantage across the entire lap. It was concentrated. Sharp. Almost surgical. Small gains in very specific zones, especially where power deployment matters most, where acceleration out of corners decides everything. That might sound normal. But here's the problem. Those are exactly the areas affected by the new energy regulations introduced for Miami. The changes in how energy is recovered and deployed should have made performance more balanced, more predictable, not more extreme. So when Mercedes shows a sharper peak under those exact conditions, it creates a contradiction. Because instead of smoothing performance differences, something is amplifying them. And that's where the attention shifts directly to the power unit. Now think of the engine like a battery system. You charge it under braking, and then you release that energy when accelerating. Simple idea, but incredibly complex in execution. Because the rules strictly control how much energy you can store, how quickly you can release it, and how often you can repeat that cycle. And every team is operating under those same limits. At least, in theory. Now here's what made people look twice. Antonelli's lap didn't just feel fast. It felt efficient. Clean exits, strong acceleration, no visible drop-off, no hesitation. Almost like the energy was always exactly where it needed to be. And that level of precision is extremely difficult to achieve. Not impossible. But difficult enough that when one team does it better than everyone else, it becomes a point of interest. Because the difference between legal optimization and illegal assistance is incredibly small. Sometimes it's software. Sometimes it's timing. Sometimes it's how systems interact in ways the regulations didn't fully anticipate. And this is where the FIA steps in. Not with accusations. With questions. They start by reviewing data. Telemetry, deployment curves, energy flow, everything that can reveal how the car behaves beneath the surface. And they compare it, not just against other teams, but against the expected model defined by the regulations. If everything matches, the story ends there. But if something doesn't align, that's when things escalate. Now add one more layer to this. Antonelli's own words. He openly said that in qualifying, the Mercedes engine is still the strongest. That sounds like confidence. But in this context, it also sounds like confirmation. Because if that strength is coming from a better understanding of the rules, Mercedes stays ahead. But if it's coming from something the rules didn't intend, then Miami isn't a victory. It's the beginning of a much bigger problem. And suddenly, that perfect lap stops being just a moment of brilliance and starts looking like a clue. And now, the situation reaches the point where it can actually change the outcome of the entire weekend. Because once the FIA starts looking, even quietly, the consequences don't stay small. They never do. At first, it's just data checks. Background analysis. Nothing public. Nothing dramatic. But inside the teams, everything shifts. Because Mercedes is no longer just the fastest car in qualifying. They become the reference point everyone is studying. Every rival engineer is now asking the same question. What did they find that we didn't? And more importantly, is it even allowed? Now imagine the pressure inside Mercedes at that exact moment. On one side, you have Antonelli, delivering perfection. 3 consecutive pole positions, total confidence, proving that the project works exactly as intended. On the other side, you have a growing spotlight. Because when performance attracts attention from the FIA, teams have to be extremely careful. Every setting, every system, every detail. Because even if everything is legal, if something looks unusual, it can still be challenged. And here's where things become fragile. Formula One regulations are not just about what is illegal. They are about interpretation. Gray areas. Tiny gaps between what is written and what is possible. That's where the biggest advantages are usually found. But that's also where the biggest risks live. Because if the FIA decides that a certain interpretation goes too far, they don't need to prove intent. They just need to redefine the rule. And suddenly, what worked yesterday stops working immediately. No penalty required. No scandal needed. Just a technical directive, and everything changes overnight. Now think about what that means for Mercedes. If their qualifying dominance depends on something that sits right on that edge, then their entire advantage is unstable. It could disappear before the next race. Or even worse, before the race in Miami itself. Because once questions are raised, scrutiny increases. And scrutiny changes behavior. Drivers feel it. Engineers feel it. Strategy becomes more conservative. Risk becomes dangerous. And in a sport decided by milliseconds, that mental shift alone can cost everything. But here's the part that makes this even more intense. All of this is happening before a single race lap has been completed. Because what Mercedes showed in qualifying doesn't match what they showed in race conditions. They dominated one lap. But over longer runs, they've already shown signs of weakness under the current regulations. And that creates a very dangerous scenario. Because if their one-lap advantage is questioned, and their race pace is not dominant, then suddenly, Mercedes goes from leading to vulnerable. Very quickly. And this is why Miami is no longer just another race. It becomes a turning point. Because depending on what the FIA finds or doesn't find, this could either confirm Mercedes as the team to beat, or expose that their biggest strength was never as secure as it looked. And everything now builds toward one final, unavoidable moment. The answer.